go ahead and start with chapter 15 in the cookbook here. We're going to talk about the divine decree. The issue of God the Son and God the Holy Spirit, as you know, were covered previously by Professor Garland. And tonight we'll move into the issue of the decree. So this is a subject that has caused many people consternation. A lot of people have struggles with this question. Some people feel, well, you know, you're just dealing with too much that is, you're trying to deal with logical questions and you're not dealing with biblical questions. But if we don't deal with issues like this, then why is the reason why we deal with the issue of the Trinity? The Trinity is a deduction that we make. We say that the Scripture says that Jesus is God. It says that the Spirit is God. It says the Father is God. It also says there's one God, so that's a contradiction in the Scripture. Unless we construct it to understand what it means. As theology is trying to make the text make sense. It's taking the biblical text. The Bible is not a theology book. The Bible is no more a theology book than looking at the Earth's crust and rock strata and rocks is a geology book. It's a source book from which you develop theology. It's a source book from which you figure out what God is saying. But to just read the Bible as though it's a theology book is to make a lot of mistakes, which people regularly do. The Bible teaches us about God, but we have to construct it and interpret it. Otherwise, you know, there's a lot of unanswered questions. And so you find Paul the Apostle as a good example of someone who teaches you how to put together the text. In the book of Romans, that's what Romans is. It's Paul's attempt to explain theology from the Old Testament. He quotes this passage and and tries to make sense of them. And of course, that's what we do in theology, is seek to quote and make sense. The Bible is not self-interpreting. And some people have made that mistake. And so that's all we're doing here. I mean, just like I try to understand how is Jesus both God and man, or how I try to understand how is three persons are one God, and how that works. It's a theological reconstruction. The divine decree is the same thing. And Jonathan Edwards is quoted here by Cook first. So let's look at his quote. It said, "Absolute sovereignty is what I love to ascribe to God, but my first conviction was not so. The first instance that I remember of that sort of inward sweet delight in God and divine things that I have lived much in since was on reading those words, 1 Timothy 1:17, now unto the King eternal, immortal, invisible, the only wise God, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen. As I read the words, there came into my soul, as was it were diffused through it, a sense of the glory of the divine being. A new sense, quite different from anything I ever experienced before. Never any words of Scripture seemed to me as these words did. I thought within myself how excellent a being that was, and how happy I should be if I might enjoy that God and be wrapped up in heaven, and be, as it were, swallowed up in Him forever. I kept saying, as it were, singing over these words of Scripture to myself, and went to pray to God that I might enjoy Him, and pray in a manner quite different from what I used to do, with a new sort of affection." By the way, we have a song, a hymn, built on this statement. You've sung it, I hope. And it's a great hymn about, you know, eternal, immortal, invisible, the only wise God is a song, a hymn. I don't know if it was in Jonathan Edwards' day. I had to look at the date, but he sang it, as it were. What I tried to teach you last time, and I think maybe many of you grasped, was that studying theology to me is worship. It's a way to exalt God. And it's not merely academic, though it is academic. But it has to be academic. I mean, a person says, you know, I don't want theology, I just want to love Jesus. First thing I want to know is, what do you mean by love? And secondly, I want to know what you mean by Jesus. Lots of Jesuses and lots of kinds of love. What do you mean by love Jesus? You know, it's sort of a nebulous concept. Maybe you're worshiping and loving a wrong Jesus. Maybe there's another Jesus you're worshiping. And oftentimes, by the way you talk to people, it is. I'm always amused by people that have a little statement, what would Jesus do? I'm afraid what Jesus would do is not what they would do. Because they think Jesus is just sort of a pushover, sort of a wimp. A guy who walks around with just a big grin on his face all the time or something. Jesus said some pretty harsh things sometimes. Was that what you would do? Of course, a lot of people, yeah, I'd do it. I'd be glad to do a lot of harsh things, but not in a godly way. Jesus was right on target with his words of condemnation or rebuke. Like to Peter, I mean, how many believers you ever get to and say, listen, get behind me, Satan. Try that out on your friends, how it works. And, but that was legitimate in that situation. Jesus had good wisdom on it, but all that says is that a lot of people's concept of Jesus is sort of meat mile over Jesus is not on target. I always hear people say, well, Jesus was such a simple teacher. He always taught in simple ways that everybody could understand. And I said, man, you've never read the Gospels, have you? All you've done by that statement is reveal to me you haven't read the Scriptures. Nobody can read the Gospels and say that Jesus' teaching was simple and that he was a simple teacher. And everybody understood it. And he meant to be understood by everybody. He clouded his teaching very often. Enigma. And words that were difficult to one to understand. Not simple at all. So it's important that we be willing to tackle a subject that's tough. And that's why I'm sort of prefacing all this. We're about to tackle a tough subject. The divine decree. And what do we mean by decree? What do you think that means when I say a decree? A decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be enrolled for the purpose of taxation. That's what the function was. What do you think it means? A word went out from, a decree went out. What's a decree?
A law, an ordinance.
Well, it's certainly connected to a law. Obviously, the person who gives a decree, it's a law. But give me some other interaction. What is a decree? When I say someone decrees something, or if I say God decrees something, what does that mean? It's a wish? It's what God wishes to happen, or what?
The declaration.
A declaration?
Command almost.
Command, a declaration, a statement of what he has decided. Right? It's from a potentate. From someone who has authority. By the way, decrees are worthless in the hands of people that have no authority to enforce them. Say, I demand that you do such and such. A decree is somewhat of a demand too. It's a statement of what the person has decided should happen. But the decree only has meaning if it's enforceable. Caesar decreed that all the world should be enrolled. And if Caesar doesn't have the ability to back it up, what worth is a decree? So connected to, there's really not making a point here. Connected to the fact that God decrees is the fact that he must be sovereign. And by sovereign, I do not mean, when you hear the word sovereignty of God out of my mouth, do not understand it means God is partly sovereign. That's like being partly pregnant. That's like the Scripture being partially inerrant. Well, it's inerrant. Well, partly. Which is a meaningless concept. And God is an omniscient God who knows some things. That doesn't make sense, does it? It doesn't. I've had people say again that God is so sovereign that he can limit his sovereignty. But the same kind of people oftentimes say God is so so infinite that he cannot know something. We're talking nonsense. It's absurdity is what we're discussing. It's the same problem. Can God make a rock that he can't lift? Absurdity. God is an infinite being who has no limitations and no imperfections. To not know something is to be imperfect, is to have limitation. And what I hear oftentimes is so much that some people want to so much guard the doctrine of human free will that they're willing to sacrifice the attributes of God to do it. Their first question isn't the honor and glory of God. My view is settle the issue of God, then we'll deal with humans. And we will. For example, we're dealing with theology proper now. and the divine decrees. Next fall, we'll deal with humanity and freedom and find out what that means. But I want to settle the issue of God first, because I want my view of God to guide my understanding of man, not my view of man to guide my understanding of God. The natural disposition of human beings is to be humans-oriented, human-centered. And they want to get whatever I can get first and then leave God the remainder. We must not do that. Not be biblical. So, we will deal in depth with the question of human freedom. And I believe humans are free, in a sense. But I believe God is free in an absolute sense. And I'm free in a limited sense. So we'll get into that later. But Cook says, no truth in all the theological encyclopedia has been more misunderstood, misstated, feared, vilified than the one we shall consider in this chapter. And yet, when properly understood, none holds more promise, encouragement, and hope. It's correctly understanding something that helps us. It is pretty standard for people who usually do not understand what's being talked about here to create in their mind a false view, sometimes called straw man argument. Attack that straw man with the lance on their charger and win the battle, and then say, see how easy it was. It would be far different to have a champion on the other side to fight them. And so straw man arguments are worthless. We must know what we're talking about first and see if that fits. If God is all wise and is sovereign, and even to consider anything else is to enthrone the absurd, then he must have a decree. If he has a decree, being truthful, loving, and holy as he is, we may be confident that whether we understand it fully or not, his plan for us involves good to the highest power. Stop there. Is Cook correct? If God is all wise and is sovereign, must he have a decree? Is that a necessary result? Is that a logical conclusion? If by decree we mean a decision of God whereby what things ought to be. Again, if we mean God is all sovereign, what do we mean? All powerful is a part of sovereignty, but it's all sovereignty requires all powerful. Because it's a worthless thing to say I'm sovereign and not have the ability to be enforcing one's sovereignty.
But you just briefly defined decree there. You said a decision by God on how things ought to be or how things will be.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Well, but I say ought to be because it's what God chooses to be.
Okay. So what they will
Yeah,
be.
but I don't mean that in a contingent sense.
Okay.
I will say anything that ought to be, in fact, will be.
Right.
If it ought to be in God, it's a moral imperative that exists within the deity himself.
So then you're answering the question.
Yes. So if we say God is all sovereign, he must have, like Tamara said, he must have the power to enact his sovereignty, or it's meaningless. I can declare being in charge, but if I can't control anybody, it's worthless. And by the way, that's different. I can say I have the right to be in charge. Let's say, I'm in a classroom with third graders or first graders, or what other graders we're talking about. I don't know what the holy terrors are right now, what age, but sixth graders?
Middle school, I don't know.
Okay, wherever these kids are in the holy terrors. It's one thing as a teacher to get up and say, I am in charge, and yet the kids are throwing things at each other, roaming around the room, and climbing desks, and all this. Say, stop it, I'm in charge. See, that expresses maybe I have the right to be in charge. I mean, I have a vested right to be in charge. But I actually don't have the capacity to keep my charge. I can't control the situation. It's out of my control. That's what people say. I've had teachers say it's just out of my control. I can't do anything. Well, they have the right to be in charge, they just simply aren't in charge. See, I'm not arguing that God merely has the right to be in charge. I'm saying He is. In other words, He has the power to accomplish His will. God says, I put forth my hand, who can stop my will? Who can thwart my will? The only person who could thwart God's will would be someone equally powerful.
Which is impossible.
Huh?
Which is impossible.
Which is impossible. So if God says it will be, it will be. Not maybe. And you understand why I'm distinguishing from the right and the actual exercise? Those are different issues. But in God, He has the right to be in charge, and He also has the exercise to be in charge. But His right to be in charge, if I use that word, control or sovereign, His right is resident in what? Truth. Why is God the one who's in control? Why does He have a right to be in control?
Because He's God.
Yeah, that's really funny, but it's because He's God. I mean, He is the only perfect being, the only wise being, the all-wise being, the only all-powerful being, the only self-existent being, the only creator. I mean, you start looking, He's the only one that matches up to all the things that are necessary for someone to be sovereign. No one else fits the bill. I mean, He, by His very nature, the properties of His being, give Him the right. But also the fact that He has those properties gives Him the power to accomplish His will. Who resists? Paul says in Romans 9. When the person looks at the person and says, well, why does God blame me? Because who can resist His will? Well, those are important questions. And we'll deal with those questions very thoroughly. Why does He still blame me for who can resist His will? The fact is, nobody can resist His will. Because if you can resist His will, then you have an equal power to Him. So, nonetheless, problems there are, and A. Hodge, writing more than 100 years ago, stated it well when he said, what is the essential nature and source of the difficulties which oppress the human reason when speculating on this subject? These difficulties all have their ground in the perfectly inscrutable relations of the eternal to the temporal, infinite to the finite, of God's absolute sovereignty to man's free agency, the unquestionable fact of the origination of sin to the holiness, goodness, wisdom, and power of God, and on and on. It's a perplexing argument that we're going to deal with. It's hard to work with. I'm not claiming it's easy. It's more difficult than some. But nonetheless important. Now, Cook gives a definition. And here it is. It comes out of the Westminster Shorter Catechism. The decree of God is His eternal purpose, according to the counsel of His own will, whereby for His own glory He has foreordained whatsoever comes to pass. That's a good definition of it. You'll find that some of the Westminster divines, whom I do not agree with all the time, for sure. I don't have to agree with people who respect them. I respect the people of the Council of Nicaea. I like what they did, except for the last portion of the creed. I think they're wrong in one aspect of it, but not in reference to the Trinity issue.
Which aspect?
When they say at the time, and baptism for the forgiveness of sins.
Oh, okay.
I think they're wrong there. I understand why they say it. I understand the history of the problem. And I think they've made a mistake at that point. But the stuff all in front of it is all good stuff. So you don't have to make everything right to be good in what you do. I respect people that I differ with on issues. And so the Westminster Confession, quite honestly, these guys did a pretty good job. It's well worth reading and learning from. I don't hold it on a par with the Bible, but I'm finding out, having been in church politics, that people hold church documents in the local church on an equal par with the Bible. So I don't know why we should be concerned with the Westminster Confession.
It's still been problematic.
That's another subject for the tape. But it disturbs me that a human document ever would be put on a par with the Bible. Now they would never say that, but we're not opening the Bible and deciding it in the Bible. We're saying that's what this document says, and so we're going to go by the document. I think we're just as bad off as anyone who holds to tradition at that point. The Bible is the authority, not my document that I sort of hide behind. And so, but some human documents I appreciate because at least I know they've been well thought through and reasoned by people of very superior intelligence over a long period of time, and they crafted it carefully. And we can learn from it. So the decree is good here. I mean, this statement is a good statement. I would encourage you to know this statement. The decree of God is His eternal purpose, according to the counsel of His own will, whereby for His own glory He has foreordained whatsoever comes to pass. It's a great statement. God does not consult anybody in eternity to decide what He will do in the world that He creates. Who's there to talk to besides Himself? God says, I'm trying to figure out how I want to sort of create this world. And I'm about to create it here in a moment now, and I'm trying to figure out what am I going to do? Anybody have any suggestions?
Spirit can all talk.
Huh?
Father, Son, and Spirit can all talk.
Yeah, in one sense. Yeah, in one sense. Their talk is somewhat different than ours, but they're all God. So the fact is, God does not consult anyone other than Himself. And I agree, Father, Son, and Spirit. God does not consult anyone other than Himself in making decisions. Why would an infinite, all-powerful, all-wise, all-knowing God consult a finite, limited, imperfect, and knowing hardly anything and not being a very wise person to get information and advice? So we're just going to throw it out there and get some suggestions, and we'll take those down, and we'll be following reviews. What a screwed up world. I would never be so presumptuous to think that I can tell the Almighty what's the best way for Him to run His world. Now that doesn't mean that God and we don't have a relationship. But remember, prayer is not, for example, prayer, that's how we talk to God. Prayer is not to inform God of something He doesn't know. It's not to advise God to do something other than what He thinks is already wise to do. It's not to force God's hand and make Him do what we want. Prayer has more to do with us getting in tune with God than Him getting, it has nothing to do with Him getting in tune with us. It's us getting in tune with God. Yeah.
So one could say God doesn't even, He doesn't even ponder anything, doesn't even think anything.
No.
It just is.
It is. It's what we call intuitive knowledge. We have what we call discursive knowledge. That is, we have one thought after the other thought after the other thought after the other. It's chronological and temporal, and the thoughts actually in time follow one another. It's a sequence of thoughts where we move from this point to this point. God knows the end from the beginning. He knows all reality is one. He knows it intuitively. He doesn't know it discursively. And I don't understand that. I just know that must be true.
Isn't it possible that He could just simply see the entire spectrum of the finite thoughts?
Well, I think He knows every thought that we have. But He sees all thoughts as one reality, not as separate realities. Remember, God is a simple being.
Right.
And so He is not experiencing moment by moment the way we experience moment by moment.
Right.
And He is not experiencing thought by thought.
Well, I
He's
guess,
experiencing all of it as one reality.
I guess why do you have to destroy the, or destroy is not the right word, but take away the sequencing of events, which are real,
They are real,
To us.
but they're occurring in time. Yeah.
occurring time? Why couldn't it be that God just simply sees all of that because He's outside of time?
Well,
But
He
it
does.
doesn't take away from the fact that they're sequential.
No, you're not understanding me. I'm not denying they're sequential. But they're sequential in reference to humans. They're sequential in reference to our way of knowledge. They're sequential in reference to the created order. They're not sequential to God in the sense they're logically sequential. I mean, God obviously knows that this in time occurs after this occurs in time. I mean, He knows Christ is crucified before He's raised. I mean, He knows
And
that.
that's what I'm talking about.
But those are temporal realities. In God, every reality is one reality. In other words, he sees the end from the beginning. He doesn't have to experience it moment by moment. He knows it is one thing. Does that make sense to you? See, otherwise you have God actually as a complex being, not a simplex being. Because he would actually be experiencing in eternity, moment by moment, which is not what eternity is.
Right.
So that's why I say his knowledge is intuitive. And I think I gave you an illustration, didn't I, one night? About the little boy looking through the hole in the fence versus being over the mountain. Did I do that one for you? I forget where I teach things.
Yeah.
But to me, that's one of the best, at least, illustrations of the issue. That is, when I'm looking through the hole in the fence, I see parts and pieces. I hear the noise, I hear this and that, I see majorettes and drum majors, and I see all these things in this hole going by me. So that what I see is actually the now, right? I see the now. I know what came by, so I have a history, and I know what there is to come. There's something to come. So I know there's a future, and I know there's a past, and I know there's a now. But I'm seeing that in sequence. I'm seeing that in a complex form. That is, it's segmented, moment by moment. Whereas God is like the guy on the mountaintop who sees the whole parade at one reality. He sees the beginning of the parade, he sees the ending of the parade, he sees everything in the middle, and it's all one idea in his mind, not pieces like we see through the novel.
But when you say that, you're only talking with respect to time, not logic.
Yes, I mean, well, and I'm even saying, yeah, I'm saying God sees things in logical relationship. Again, that's why I said God knows that part of time is, in fact, for the resurrection to follow the crucifixion. How can you have a resurrection of a person died if he hasn't died? I mean, those are all temporal realities.
And they're not happening at the same.
No, they're not happening. See, when I say they're happening, that's a temporal issue.
Right.
In eternity is Jesus being crucified.
Right.
Anybody?
Is he being?
In eternity is he crucified?
No.
No. Not reality.
And that's where he gets that.
Crucifixion occurs in time. But that he is known certainly to be crucified. That's the key. In God, in eternity, everything is certain. And known as a reality that will in fact occur in time without any question. I mean, there is no possibility, it's 100% certain that everything that God knows in eternity will in fact happen in time, that he knows will happen in time. Does that make sense?
This gets back to what we were talking about before. Is it certain because he knows, or does he know because it's certain?
Well, I would say that knowledge is based on his decision. Otherwise, you have God knowing something that will happen, and then he says, oh, since I know it will happen, I guess I'll decide for it to happen. Now here we're dealing with logic again. I'm dealing with a logical relationship. I think it probably hits God intuitively again. But from a logical standpoint, God must decide for something to happen before he can know that it will happen. Or otherwise, he'd be knowing something to happen before that he even decides to do it. So I would say his knowledge is based, in a logical standpoint, his knowledge is based upon his capacity to make decisions as a free agent. Again, these are eternal in nature, not temporal in nature. Well, we're going to see that in just a moment. This is where we're moving. But it's important we understand this. Let me give the definition again. The decree of God is its eternal purpose. In other words, God in eternity has a purpose. Some people say, well, if God does this, then he's a capricious God. He's an arbitrary God. And I say, you don't know the definition of arbitrary and capricious. You're using the wrong term. Whatever you may mean, you don't mean that. Because an arbitrary decision or a capricious decision is a decision that does not have a plan, a reason, a purpose behind it. If I have a reason why I do something, it's no longer arbitrary. Does that make sense to you? That's what we mean by the words. So we clearly don't mean God does something arbitrarily, because I've already said, in eternity, he has a purpose for what he does. It's all thought through, so to speak. He has a plan. Okay. And on what basis does he have a plan? Where does he get this plan in this definition?
According to his own will.
He consults himself. That's right. The counsel, that's the word counsel. The counsel of his own will. Where does he get his plan? From himself. Remember that statement at the very end of Romans chapter 11? Remember that passage? Great passage, one of the greatest. Wonderful, wonderful conclusion to the book. For who is known, let's start above. Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord? Or who has been his counselor? Or who has given a gift to him that he might be repaid? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. Amen. The point of it is, he does everything after the counsel of his own will. And now see, now we're saying he has a plan. In making up this plan, he consults himself. For a perfect, all-wise plan, you need a perfect, all-wise person to make it. So he consults himself. And why does he do his plan? What's the function? What's the teleology of this? What's the ultimate goal? Our happiness.
His glory.
Oh, his glory. Now, see, God does everything after the counsel of his own will for his own glory. Now, some people say, well, that's sort of egotistical. No, that's only if you're a human being is it egotistical, because you're pretending to be something that you are not. See, to claim to, well, I'm, Cassius Clay, I'm the greatest, Muhammad Ali. I am the greatest. No, he's not. See, that's pretentious, it's arrogant, it's egotistical, but it's not accurate. Anytime we take glory to ourselves as though we are the ones that are really the key, we're the ones responsible for it all, at that point we've actually been involved in thou shalt not steal. When you take glory to yourself, then you're stealing it from the one who deserves it. The glory belongs to God. Soli Deo Gloria. Only be glory to God. And so he does everything after the counsel of his own will for his own glory. A perfect being has a perfect right, and matter of fact, ought to bring glory to himself. And then notice, because of this, he has foreordained whatever comes to pass. For example, if he does not foreordain whatever comes to pass, then is there any certitude that things will just sort of come out the right way somehow on their own?
No, he would make it arbitrary.
But yeah, it's randomness, it's chance. Well, I've had people say, well, God doesn't control things, he doesn't foreordain things, but he's always around to sort of make sure by the end of all things that it all happens right. These are people that ought to chase the bunny with Alice, because that's not how the world works. I mean, the point of it is, there's a reason why Jesus rose from the dead. He had to die first. There's a reason why he had, that he was able to die first, because, certain things took place in his life. There's a reason why certain things took place in life. Everything has in the universe, the world is made up of a closed system. Do you realize that? God has created a closed system. It has an A point and a Z point. It's a closed system. And in this system, there's a cause and effect world, in which whatever happens in such a way that it impacts something else that happens, which in fact impacts and it just sort of spreads like a network. The world is intricate and related. And God just can't sort of let things go any way they want to go and then sort of jump in at the very end and say, oh, I'm going to save it at the end. That's why I'm saying you have God operating as first cause, sometimes called material cause. Then you had God involved in formal cause, that is setting forth the rules, the ground rules, like the guy who established the rules for the game. The person who writes the rule book that the game follows. And then you have the efficient cause, where God is not totally the cause, in the sense of causing everything in a direct sense. And then you have the final cause. But the fact is, God has purposed everything will take place by foreordination. That is, He has determined what will happen in every way. Now, I've tried to take time to explain to you that foreordination, foredetermination, and I use the same concept, does not mean that you have that accomplished in the same way. I think you could foreordain by permitting people to sin just as much as you can act by doing direct acts. In other words, I think permission and God's own proactiveness occurs both in the determination. God determined from all eternity, when I say this, His eternal purpose according to the counsel of His will, whereby for His own glory He has foreordained people will sin. Does not mean that He causes people to sin. That is by a direct act. He doesn't come down and coerce people to sin. I think we have a biblical text that teaches that. On the other hand, I'm absolute certainty in the biblical text that He certainly did permit His people to sin. And He could have altered it had He so chosen. And there's not a doubt in my mind, and maybe you, I don't know if you want to come back to me on this, there's not a doubt in my mind that God could have, had He so chosen to do so, and I'd say He would only have done that if in fact it was in His plan to do so, to keep the snake from getting in the garden, to keep Adam from Eve from sinning. He could have had a 15-foot high wall around that thing, with barbed wire or something. I mean, there's all sorts of things He could have done. But He chose to let them sin. That was part of His plan. But I don't believe He came in there and enticed them to sin, which is what Satan did. So that's causation in an efficient sense.
Would you say, I think I don't know how you're going to answer this, but I'm not sure how it connects. So if He's not causing them directly to sin, is when, the point of time they sin, an open question?
No, actually, the time they would sin also was certain.
It was certain, but was it whether they were in the garden 3 months, 5 years, 10 years, doesn't even matter.
Yeah, I don't know how long they were there.
Doesn't matter to God.
Yeah, well, it matters only in the sense that He determines everything that's going to happen.
So
He
you gotta start
determines
talking
the time
about
also.
levels. You're kind of start talking about, and it's what you're getting to, is levels of determination.
Yeah, I mean, He determined that they would sin, and He determined the time they would sin. But remember, determination or foreordination, I do not mean by that, though, that He caused them to sin, in the sense that He enticed them to do so. I don't think God was in the garden and said, "Come over and eat the fruit." But I do believe He was in the garden. And I do believe He watched the snake move into the garden, and I do know He could have stepped on his head if He wanted to. He could have kicked Satan out of heaven immediately. I mean, it would have been an easy thing if God had wanted to. The minute Lucifer sinned, He said, this action of yours is going to cause problems down the road. So, poof. Oh, He's gone.
But then you have to say that God set things up
God
for Adam and Eve to sin.
Well, I'm back to Lucifer now.
Yeah.
God foreordained everything that comes to pass. He foreordained that Lucifer would, in fact, sin.
So if He sets it up, how is that not enticing?
Because there's no personal act of God on an individual in which they exercise their will in respect of any coaching that He's doing for them to do it. They will, actually, I believe human beings free willing, free willing, that's a I think that human beings willingly sin.
Right.
You don't have, when they sin, they do it because they want to. And I think Satan, it arose in his heart to sin. God did not keep it from rising in his heart. See, I don't think in eternity anybody, when, in the sense of when we, as we sometimes call it, eternity future, when we move into a temporal existence that's different from ours now, I don't think there will be a time in the future when anybody ever will sin. I don't think this is repeated. I think the drama is worked out in time and space. The beginning of the drama and the end of the drama is worked out. And it's settled for once and for all. There will never be a place anywhere in the future, in eternity, where people will ever sin. you know, the redeemed, and the angels who in fact did not sin. They'll never be that. But I still believe they'll have a will. I don't think they're going to be will-less, but it will be a will that's confirmed not to sin. And I think that's the word of God. So, well, let's move on. At first glance, it may seem that such a statement views God as being under some bond of necessity, which robs him of all freedom and depersonalizes his relationship with creation. No such idea is intended, nor is it allowed in light of biblical revelation. Notice the distinction here. This is from Thesis. The decrees originate in God's freedom. Remember I said, who is free in the universe?
God.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I've stated that wrong. Because God's not in the universe. So I have to
Well, he
also...
is.
Huh?
He is
Where?
in the universe. As well as
It's
us.
not the only place he has.
No, God is not in the universe.
Okay. Can you explain that?
Yeah. Is an expression of existence. An infinite being does not exist within a finite existence.
Okay.
God is infinite, and so he is not within that which is finite. I'm willing to grant you that God is everywhere there is matter and space, but he himself is not inside that matter and space. He's not in the universe. That's why I say God is really next to the universe, not in the universe. The way I usually explain it, everywhere there is space, there is God, but God is not in space.
Okay.
Now, there's no question God acts in space and time. And some people they don't distinguish those. When I say God is, I do not deny the fact that God is not in space, but God acts in space.
So when God met with Moses in the tent, or when he dwelt above the mercy
He is not
seat,
there in his being. He is there in his manifestation of his being.
is that not also him?
It's his manifestation, it's not him. It's how he is representing himself within a temporal frame, visible, physical universe. I mean, that bush that was burning was a manifestation of God, but that bush, in fact, was not God. God is in the bush. Do you agree with that? God's not a bush. God's not a rock. You know, God's not ultimately a man. Even Jesus.
But it did say that God was in the bush.
Yeah, but you have to understand we're talking about language that is a temporal kind of language. We're not dealing with, we're dealing with language as we use it in a human sense, not as it exists in its true self. That's in the same sense that God changes his mind. I mean, it's the same kind of idea. It's a metaphor. For see, if I say the being of God who's infinite exists in a finite existence, then it makes no sense to talk about God being infinite.
So the Holy Spirit doesn't truly live in us.
In you in the sense of existing in space and time, no. But if you mean in the sense that I think the Scripture's talking about, it's a metaphor of discussion. That is, we have a relationship with the Spirit. Because otherwise, we have to deal with the issue of Spirit existing in. I mean, unless you think the Spirit actually is a tangible reality that sort of fills up, like our body. Like when you get bigger, like I'm gaining weight, my spirit sort of has to stretch a little bit or shrink when I lose down. I don't think the Spirit is a tangible reality as we think of it. And I think that God God in his essence does not exist in time and space. But I don't have no question that God in his activity exists in time and space. I think God acts. We see his manifestation. That's why I use the word manifestation. It's a representation of God. I mean, the Shekinah glory is not God. The Shekinah glory is the visible representation of God. That's why no man can really see God, and no one can really know God in his true essence. Only the Son who dwells with the Father from all eternity, in eternity, really understands God, because he is in his divinity he's everything that God is, because he's God.
So do you have to say Jesus was simply a manifestation of the Son on earth.
No, see, with Jesus is different. See, because with Jesus, that's why the issue of the Chalcedonian Creed, you have one person who exists as God, and the same person exists as human. Let me ask you this. Is it possible for a person to dwell within temporal restraints?
Within what?
Is it possible for a person to dwell within temporality?
Yeah.
Well, we've got at least 5 examples in the room here.
But, I mean, I guess that depends what you
That's
mean
a
by
joke.
person too.
6 of us here.
I mean, like, my body can, but I mean, my,
Now, you are localized. You're not omnipresent. So
no, I'm saying like,
But we have a spirit
yeah,
that is also not physical, but it still is localized here.
and I agree with that, because we have a finite spirit.
So why does infinites?
Infinite means unlimited,
Right.
unrestricted.
Well, is it
Not
not possible
defi-
that
not-
he's,
you can't
that
draw
he's
a circle.
everywhere here and everywhere elsewhere, not limited by here?
We are, because we are, I'm not saying that spirits are not localized. Spirits are localized in some sense. Now, I don't even understand that, really. Not in the full sense, because I've never experienced a spirit as an entity by itself. I mean, I don't know what that means exactly. But I do know this, that in this room there are 6 persons who have in fact spirits. And I know that your spirit is my spirit is your spirit, and I know that your spirit is in eternity, is here. Your spirit is existing within a temporal, finite existence.
Is there anything in the Bible that suggests that God does not actually exist in the universe?
Well, the fact is, he's above the universe.
Well, I'm not denying that. I'm just
What gets back to the definition of omnipresent?
Yeah, so omnipresent means that he is everywhere present. Everywhere there is space and time, God is there.
so you
Isn't that all
shouldn't you
you were
shouldn't
saying?
use. Then you shouldn't use the term omnipresent.
Sure, there's a fine time.
Isn't that what
Or
you were
immensity.
referring to when you said God is here?
Yeah, that's all. Well, of course, that's all I was referring
See,
to.
I don't identify the God with the world.
No,
The world is one reality and God's another,
right,
right? The world is a finite reality and God's an infinite reality.
right.
And so you can't identify the two. God is actually transcendent above the world. When we say he's immanent, is the term E-M-M-A-N-E-T. When we say he's immanent, we mean by that everywhere there is in fact the world, God is there. But we do not mean that God, theologians when they speak to this, do not mean that God in fact is somehow encompassed within the world. That's panentheism. That God exists within the world.
That's not panentheism if you also recognize that God is transcendent beyond, and he's not limited by the world.
Well, he is if he exists within.
Why?
Because all of God is everywhere.
Right.
Okay? So when I say God is everywhere, I don't mean part here and part there, or part 50,000 miles from here. And I mean, all of the being of God is present everywhere.
I
So
guess
you would
I
never
don't
want
know.
to say God is not here.
I think he's here.
You did say that God is not here.
I know, but
No, I believe God is here in the sense that he's here wherever there's time and space, but he is not within it. That's why I say the way I would explain it is this, that wherever there is, this represents all reality that's temporal, and all reality that's limited in space. Not unlimited space, not unlimited time. Temporal and finite space. Everywhere there is that, that's where God is. I think God is everywhere. There is, in fact, matter, time, space. But I do not believe he exists within it. Because when I say God at this point, I'm talking about the infinite essence of deity does not exist within a finite reality. But I would acknowledge that God himself, as a personal being, interacts with time and space. There's no question about that. He is certainly active. The issue of Jesus is different. Because in reality, I can argue, see, when I say person, I'm dealing differently with the fact of essence, remember? So there are 3 persons who share equally one essence. But it's possible, apparently, for one person of the essence of God to take upon himself humanity, and that person to exist in the same time and space universe you do. I mean, I exist in a time and space universe as a person. Jesus, as a person, exists within a time and space universe. Right? He was truly human. He wasn't only appearing to be human, he was human. He was not a manifestation, he was a genuine, actual human being.
But he would have had to only be a manifestation of God if God
No.
cannot exist in.
No, because you're not catching me. I'm not denying his personhood exists in time and space.
Okay, but his
So it
essence.
exists in time and space as a human being.
But would his personhood not be a?
But his personhood is not equal to
manifestation?
his essence. That's why there are three persons who are one God.
So, but wouldn't that mean that his personhood was only a manifestation?
No. The personhood is genuine and real. It's that personhood apparently is capable of existing and humanity as a human person. But the personhood of God in reference to his deity is infinite.
Do you know of any other theologians that talk about this?
Well, all the Orthodox theologians I know.
Well, I haven't ever seen this in any of the theologies that read. That's why
Well, just read some more theology and I think you'll find out.
I'm just asking for an example.
Yeah, okay, well, we can find some. I'll have to locate them for you, but I guarantee you, this is the basic view.
Okay.
That the fact is God as an infinite being does not exist within time and space. Read Aquinas, that'd be a good place to start.
Aquinas.
Yeah, he's one of the most profound thinkers in Christendom. But you have to understand my terminology. I'm trying to go through this again until you understand what I'm saying. I'm not denying that the person of the deity can couple with humanity in other words, the created order. But that's clearly true of Jesus. I'm not saying the humanity of Jesus is merely a manifestation, not like the burning bush. See, for example, when God appeared to Abraham in the desert there, in Genesis 18, remember he ate food and he had his feet washed and so forth. I'm not denying that the person, the deity, took upon himself a created form. Right? I acknowledge that. I think we talked about that. But at that juncture, he did not become a human being.
Like when we're made a partaker of his divine nature, are we not? I mean, is that not his essence?
That's a big issue. That's a whole question of Eastern Orthodoxy versus the West. It's a good question, and I'm not going to settle here now. But there's a big debate on that question. In what sense are we partakers of the divine nature? What does that mean? Are we talking about incommunicable or communicable attributes there? I don't think we can clearly participate in God's incommunicable attributes. So it must be we are partakers of his divine nature in reference to communicable attributes. Do you understand my terminology? Okay. So please understand me now. I'm not denying that the person of the deity can couple with humanity in the created order and be a true human. What I'm arguing, though, is the person of the deity in his properties of deity, which are infinite in nature. That's part of the infinite. That one of the properties of the divine nature is, in fact, infinitude. Cannot operate and exist, and I should say, cannot exist as a being within a finite reality.
Why not?
Because you cannot have infinity existing with infinitude. It's a nonsensical concept.
I don't. Well, I mean, like,
It's like saying God can exist and not exist simultaneously.
why is that? It's like saying that. That's what I'm asking. Like,
Because it's an absurdity.
if there were in existence an infinite amount of paper clips, and I had 10 paper clips, would that not be included in that infinite amount? I mean, that's a finite thing within.
That's not an analogy. First of all, our use of the word infinite really doesn't mean infinite. But
What I mean as infinite.
I don't hear engineers talking about infinite numbers, and that's not what we're talking about philosophically. But infinite means there's no limitation to the existence. That is, the being is not in any way hindered, limited, confined, imperfect. You cannot draw a circle around it. It's infinite. So the minute you talk about finite, you mean by that finite, limited, and you can draw a circle around it.
So would
So you can't put a circleless being within a circle.
So do you have Would you mean you would have a problem with me making the statement that God is here?
Not if we, I know we use terminology, it's figures of speech and metaphors when you speak about God. If by that you, I mean, I've said that, God is here. I mean, I believe that. But I don't believe it means he is in his divine nature here. In the sense that he occupies time and space. See, this is time and space. I don't think God lives within time and space.
I would think that saying that he can't exist here is limiting him, not saying that he can exist here and elsewhere.
Well, I'm not limiting in the sense that I'm not, am I limiting God to say he can't sin? Is that limiting God? Yeah, it is limiting God, in one sense. But I'm not limiting him in reference to his divine nature. His divine nature is not consonant with sin. And I would say I'm not limiting God when I'm saying his divine nature is not consonant with time and space.
Wouldn't you say that divine nature permeates, in infinitude and eternity, it permeates time, space, it permeates everything?
Right, that's all I'm.
Not his
that's
nature
my
does not.
opinion.
His nature
influence
doesn't?
does. His influence does. It's not his
But
nature.
his nature does not permeate time and space?
No. If you mean by permeate, it means exist within. No.
No, but I mean,
Because you
without
do not-
and within.
You do not have a limitless being living within a limited area.
Right, what if
See,
we say
because- see,
without
what-
and within?
See, part of what the issue that was brought up a moment ago is the fact that when Grant said, well, can't you take an infinite number of paper clips and just take 10 out? See, because the minute you take 10 out, you've already committed a heresy.
But I'm not taking them out. I'm saying, like,
You
they're
can't-
here,
you
they're
can't-
still here.
You can't
still
take the
within.
10 paper clips and separate them out from the infinite
But
number.
I'm not separating.
What are you doing?